I never imagined I would find myself in the midst of a horror story, yet here I am, recounting the chilling and harrowing events that unfolded in the seemingly tranquil town of Hollow Creek. It was supposed to be a peaceful summer, the kind that lingers in your memory like a sweet, nostalgic scent that evokes the warmth of carefree days. The small town, with its quaint charm, friendly faces, and picturesque landscapes, seemed like the perfect escape from the chaos and noise of city life, a place where one could unwind and reconnect with nature. But beneath the surface of this idyllic facade, something sinister was brewing, lurking just out of sight. It all began with the unsettling disappearances that sent ripples of fear through our community. At first, they were merely whispers, people in town speculating about how old Mr. Thompson had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only unanswered questions and an eerie silence. Then, a young couple who had just moved in from the city mysteriously disappeared on their way home from a late-night stroll, their absence leaving a palpable void in the air. The local police shrugged it off, attributing it to the couple's poor sense of direction and their unfamiliarity with the area. But as the days turned into weeks, the number of missing persons grew, and the atmosphere in Hollow Creek shifted from serene to suffocating, as if a heavy fog of dread had settled over the town. My friends and I, a tight-knit group of 5, decided to gather at our usual spot, a rickety old wooden bridge that spanned a narrow, babbling creek just outside of town. It was a place filled with laughter, joy, and countless memories, where we had spent countless summer nights sharing stories, dreams, and secrets. But this time, an unsettling feeling hung in the air, a weight that pressed down on us as we settled onto the creaking planks of the bridge, the wood groaning under our combined weight. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, elongated shadows across the ground, we attempted to shake off the unease that had settled in our hearts. We joked about the disappearances, dismissing them as mere coincidence or the product of overactive imaginations. "It's just a small town thing," I said, trying to sound more confident than I truly felt. My friends laughed, but their eyes betrayed a flicker of fear, a shared acknowledgement that something was not quite right. The night deepened, and the woods surrounding us grew darker, the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves filling the silence like a haunting lullaby. We shared ghost stories, each tale more outrageous than the last, as we tried to distract ourselves from the gnawing fear that had taken root in our minds. But as the clock struck midnight, the atmosphere shifted again, becoming heavy with an unshakable sense of foreboding. A dense fog rolled in, creeping along the ground like a living entity, wrapping around our ankles and making the world feel smaller, more claustrophobic, as if the very air we breathed had become thick with dread. Then it happened. A chilling scream pierced the night, echoing through the trees like a death knell. We all froze, our laughter dying in our throats, replaced by a silence that felt suffocating. The sound was unmistakable, a cry of pure terror that sent shivers down my spine. It came from the direction of the town, and in that moment, a primal fear gripped us, paralyzing us with its intensity. We scrambled to our feet, hearts racing, unsure of what to do or where to go. "Did you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling with fear. "Yeah, we should check it out," I suggested, though I wasn't sure if I believed my own words or if I was merely trying to convince myself that venturing into the unknown was a good idea. We started toward the sound, our flashlights cutting through the thick fog that had enveloped our surroundings. The beams of light danced nervously, illuminating the trees that loomed like silent sentinels, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. As we moved deeper into the woods, the atmosphere grew heavier, the air thick with an unshakable dread that seemed to cling to our skin. Suddenly, a shadow darted between the trees, and my heart leaped into my throat as I squinted into the darkness. "What was that?" I gasped, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Jake replied, his voice shaking slightly as he tried to suppress his fear. Before we could react, the shadow reappeared, larger than before, a dark mass that seemed to absorb the light around it, rendering the world even darker. It moved with an unnatural speed, and before we could comprehend what was happening, it lunged toward us with terrifying swiftness. "Run!" I shouted, adrenaline surging through my veins as panic took hold. We turned and sprinted back toward the bridge, our breaths coming in ragged gasps, the sound of branches snapping behind us sending us into a frenzy. Each footfall echoed our growing panic, a frantic rhythm of fear that propelled us forward. But as we reached the bridge, we realized one of our own was missing. "Where's Sarah?" I shouted, spinning around in a desperate search for her. "She was right behind us," Jake cried, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Sarah!" I called out, my voice cracking under the weight of dread. The fog thickened, obscuring our view and swallowing our cries. I felt a chill creep down my spine as I realized the darkness was closing in around us, suffocating us like a vice. "Guys, we need to go back for her," I urged, desperation clawing at my throat, but the fear in their eyes was palpable, a mirror of my own terror. "No way," Lisa said, shaking her head vigorously. "We can't go back into that darkness." But I couldn't abandon her. I couldn't let fear dictate my actions, not when a friend was in danger. "I'm going back," I declared, my voice firm and resolute. I stepped into the fog, the world around me fading into a swirling abyss of uncertainty. I called out for Sarah, my voice swallowed by the night, echoing into the void. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to flee from the encroaching darkness, but I pressed on, determined to find her, to bring her back to safety. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl that sent chills down my spine and made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. I froze, the sound reverberating through the trees, a warning that something was very, very wrong. It was closer now, and I could feel its presence, a dark entity lurking just beyond my vision, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Sarah!" I shouted again, desperation clawing at my throat as I strained to hear her response. The growl intensified, morphing into a cacophony of whispers that seemed to echo all around me, drowning out my thoughts. I stumbled backward, panic rising as I realized I was completely alone, utterly isolated in this nightmarish fog. The bridge was nowhere in sight, and the fog enveloped me like a shroud, a suffocating blanket of darkness. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, and I gasped, my heart racing in my chest. It was Sarah, or what was left of her. Her eyes were wide with terror, her face pale as if she had seen something beyond comprehension, something that shattered the very fabric of reality. "Run!" she screamed, her voice laced with an urgency that sent me into motion, propelling me forward as if my life depended on it. We turned to flee, but the shadow was upon us, a swirling mass of darkness that reached out with tendrils of mist, grasping at our ankles. It wrapped around my legs, pulling me down as I struggled to break free, fighting against the overwhelming force that sought to drag me into the abyss. "Don't look back!" Sarah shouted, but I couldn't help it. I glanced over my shoulder and saw the creature, a grotesque amalgamation of shadows and whispers, its eyes glowing with a malevolent hunger that sent chills down my spine, paralyzing me with terror. With a surge of adrenaline, I broke free and sprinted ahead, Sarah at my heels, our breaths mingling in frantic gasps. We burst into the clearing where the bridge once stood, but it was gone, replaced by an impenetrable wall of fog that seemed to stretch on forever. Panic surged as I realized we were trapped, ensnared in this nightmare with no way out. "Where are the others?" I gasped, my breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps as I looked around, hoping to see a familiar face. "I don't know," Sarah cried, her voice trembling with fear and uncertainty. The fog thickened around us, and the whispers grew louder, enveloping us in a cacophony of despair that threatened to swallow us whole. I felt a pull, a dark force trying to drag me into the depths of the night, into a place from which there would be no return. "Fight it!" I yelled, grasping Sarah's hand tightly, refusing to let go as we stumbled forward, our hearts pounding in unison. We pushed through the fog, the sounds of the creature closing in behind us, its presence a suffocating weight that threatened to crush us beneath its darkness. Then, just as I thought we would be lost to the shadows forever, a light flickered in the distance. It was faint, but it was there, a beacon of hope, a promise of safety. "Over there!" I shouted, dragging Sarah toward the light, my heart racing with renewed determination. We pushed through the fog, and as we drew closer, we saw the outline of the bridge, its weathered planks glowing in the moonlight like a lifeline. We sprinted toward it, the whispers growing fainter as we reached the safety of the wood, the familiar creaking of the bridge beneath our feet a welcome sound in the chaos. But the creature was relentless. It surged forward, and I could feel its icy breath on my neck, a chilling reminder of the darkness that pursued us. I turned to face it, my heart pounding in my chest, a primal instinct urging me to stand my ground. "Go!" I yelled at Sarah, shoving her onto the bridge, desperation fueling my words. "No! I won't leave you," she screamed, her eyes wide with fear, pleading with me to join her. "Just go!" I insisted, my voice breaking as I felt the weight of the darkness closing in around us. With one last look filled with uncertainty and fear, she ran across the bridge, and I turned to face the encroaching darkness. The creature loomed before me, its eyes burning with a hunger that sent chills down my spine, a reminder of the evil that thrived in the shadows. In that moment, I realized the truth, the disappearances, the whispers, the darkness, it was all connected. Hollow Creek was a trap, a place where the shadows thrived, feeding off the fear of those who wandered too close to the edge of despair. As the creature lunged, I felt a surge of determination coursing through my veins. I would not be another victim, another name lost to the void. I would fight, I would resist, even if it meant facing my worst fears head-on. I turned and ran, the bridge creaking beneath my feet as I sprinted toward the light, the whispers rising to a deafening crescendo, a cacophony of despair that threatened to drown me. But I pushed through, my heart pounding in my chest, fueled by the desire to survive. Finally, I reached the other side, and as I crossed the threshold, I felt the weight of the darkness lift, the suffocating grip of fear releasing its hold on me. The creature let out a deafening roar, a sound filled with rage and hunger, but I was free from the clutches of the night. I stumbled into the clearing, gasping for breath as I turned to see the bridge behind me dissolve into the fog, swallowed by the darkness. The whispers faded, and the night grew still, a haunting silence settling over the land. But the horror of that night would never leave me. I had escaped, but I had lost my friends, my home, and a part of myself that I feared would never return. Hollow Creek would forever haunt my dreams, a reminder of the darkness that lurked just beyond the light, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to ensnare. In the days that followed, I tried to return to normalcy, to piece together the fragments of my shattered life, but the town was different. The disappearances continued, each new loss a reminder of the danger that lurked in the shadows. The whispers of the shadows echoed in my mind, a constant reminder of the terror that had unfolded. I became a ghost in my own life, haunted by the memories of that night, the faces of my friends forever etched in my mind. And every so often, when the fog rolled in, thick and heavy, I would hear the whispers calling my name, a chilling reminder of the darkness that still lurked in the shadows, waiting for its next victim, waiting for the next moment of weakness to strike. I never imagined that my otherwise mundane life would take a dark turn, but it all began with a simple yet unsettling discovery in my kitchen. One particularly uneventful evening, as I rummaged through the clutter of pots, pans, and various kitchen gadgets, I stumbled upon a door I had never noticed before. It was small and almost hidden behind a stack of old cookbooks that I rarely used. The door had a peculiar, weathered appearance, its surface marred by scratches and faded paint, and it sent an inexplicable shiver down my spine as I stood before it. Curiosity, that insatiable beast that resides within all of us, urged me to open it. I felt an electric thrill course through me as I reached for the handle, my heart racing with a mix of excitement and trepidation. As I turned the handle, a sudden chill swept through the room, wrapping around me like a cold embrace, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow pantry that seemed to stretch infinitely into darkness, a void that beckoned me closer. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, but the allure of the unknown was too powerful to resist. I took a deep breath and stepped inside, the air thickening around me, heavy with an unsettling silence that felt almost alive. The pantry was unlike any I had ever encountered. Shelves lined with jars of unidentifiable contents glimmered in the dim light, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls like phantoms. I reached for a jar, its label faded and illegible, and as my fingers brushed against the cool glass, a surge of fear coursed through me. It was a strange mix of dread and intrigue, and I pulled my hand back instinctively. Yet, the curiosity gnawed at me relentlessly, urging me to push past my fear and explore further into this mysterious space. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself visiting the pantry more frequently than I should have. Each time I opened that door, I felt a strange pull, as if something within was calling to me, whispering secrets that only I could hear. I began to experiment, tossing random objects inside, an old spoon, a crumpled receipt, even a half-eaten apple. To my astonishment, they vanished into the darkness, swallowed whole by the void that lay beyond. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once, a thrill that sent my heart racing and my mind spinning. But as I delved deeper into this strange realm, I started to notice unsettling changes within myself. The pantry transformed from a mere curiosity into an all-consuming obsession. I spent hours standing before it, contemplating what else I could cast into the abyss, what other secrets I could uncover. The thrill of watching items disappear morphed into a darker desire, one that whispered insidious thoughts into my mind, urging me to take bolder steps and test the limits of this otherworldly space. One particularly long and exhausting night, I found myself standing in front of the pantry, my heart racing with anticipation and a sense of foreboding. I glanced at the family photo hanging on the wall, a snapshot of my son, my ex-wife, and me, all smiles and laughter frozen in time. The image felt distant, like a fading memory that I could barely grasp. I was suddenly consumed by a powerful urge to test the limits of this strange realm. What if I threw something more significant inside? Something that would truly test its powers and reveal what lay beyond. The thought of my ex-wife crossed my mind, her face contorted in anger from our last argument, a memory that still stung. I felt a surge of rage and betrayal rise within me, a tempest of emotions that clouded my judgment. In that moment, I made a decision that would haunt me forever. I grabbed a small, heavy object, a decorative paperweight that had once held great sentimental value, and hurled it into the pantry. As it vanished into the darkness, I felt a rush of satisfaction mixed with dread, a thrill that quickly turned to horror as I realized what I had done. But the repercussions of my actions were swift and unforgiving. That very night, I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. It was my son, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Dad, I had a bad dream," he whispered, his voice trembling as he stood in the doorway. I pulled him close, wrapping my arms around him tightly, but the warmth of his presence only deepened my guilt. I had let my darkness seep into our lives, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me like a heavy shroud. Days passed, and I found myself spiraling downwards into a pit of despair. The pantry's pull grew stronger, and I began to lose touch with reality. I started seeing shadows flitting around the corners of my vision, dark shapes that danced just beyond my line of sight, and whispers echoed in the silence of my home, taunting me with their secrets. My son became increasingly withdrawn, sensing the change in me, and I could see the fear in his eyes as he watched me unravel. One particularly unsettling evening, I stood before the pantry, the door slightly ajar, as if inviting me back into its depths. I could hear a faint whispering coming from within, beckoning me closer, promising answers to questions I had not yet thought to ask. I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest, but the compulsion was too strong to resist. I stepped inside, and the darkness enveloped me like a shroud, swallowing me whole. I lost track of time, lost in the abyss of my own making, the shadows wrapping around me like tendrils of smoke. In my mind, I envisioned my ex-wife, her face twisted in rage and fear, her voice echoing in my ears. I felt a surge of power, a desire to control the narrative of our broken lives, to rewrite the story that had led us to this point. I reached out to grab something else, a small, framed photograph of us from happier times, a reminder of the love we once shared. I was about to toss it into the void when a voice broke through the silence, sharp and clear, cutting through the darkness like a knife. "Stop!" I froze, the photograph trembling in my hand as I turned to see my son standing at the entrance of the pantry, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Please don't, Dad. Don't do it." His voice was filled with desperation, a plea that resonated deep within me. In that moment, clarity washed over me like a cleansing tide. I realized the depth of my actions, the darkness I had willingly embraced, and the potential for irreversible harm that lay within my grasp. I dropped the photograph, and it clattered to the floor, the glass shattering into a million pieces, each shard reflecting the light in a haunting dance. My son rushed to my side, and I pulled him into a tight embrace, the weight of my choices crashing down on me like a tidal wave. I could feel the darkness receding, the shadows retreating as I fought to reclaim my sanity and my life. But the pantry was not done with me yet. As I turned to leave, I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder, pulling me back into the abyss. I gasped, the darkness swirling around me, whispering promises of power and control that tempted me to succumb once more. I fought against it with every ounce of strength I had, struggling to break free, but the shadows tightened their grip, threatening to drag me back into their depths. "Let go!" I screamed, my voice echoing in the void, a cry of defiance against the darkness that sought to consume me. With a surge of determination, I pushed against the oppressive weight of the shadows, breaking free from their hold. I stumbled out of the pantry, gasping for breath, and slammed the door shut behind me with a force born of desperation. The air felt lighter, a fragile sense of relief washing over me, but I knew the shadows lingered just beyond the threshold, waiting for their next opportunity to ensnare me once more. In the days that followed, I worked tirelessly to rebuild my relationship with my son, to mend the rifts that had formed between us due to my obsession with the pantry. I sought help, reaching out to professionals who could guide me in understanding the darkness that had consumed me. I learned to let go of the anger and resentment that had fueled my descent into madness, grasping the importance of forgiveness and healing. Slowly, we began to heal, but the pantry remained a constant reminder of my near downfall, a specter that loomed over our lives. I sealed the door, vowing never to open it again, to keep the darkness at bay. The whispers of the shadows still echoed in my mind, but I refused to listen to their insidious calls. I focused on my son, on rebuilding our lives together, determined to create a brighter future for us both. The pantry of shadows became a distant memory, a warning of the darkness that lurked within us all, a reminder of the fragile line between curiosity and obsession. But as I write this, I can still feel the pull of that otherworldly space, the temptation to explore its depths once more. I know the darkness is always there, lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for a moment of weakness to ensnare me again. And I wonder, will I ever truly be free from its grasp? Will I be able to resist the seductive call of the pantry, or will I one day find myself standing before it again, teetering on the edge of that dark abyss? The thought fills me with dread, And yet, a part of me remains curious, yearning to uncover the secrets that lie within. Since I turned 18, I found myself working as a night security guard in this dilapidated old building. The pressures of life and the need to pay the bills forced me into this high-paying but eerie security job, even though I harbored a deep-seated awareness that this place was far from ordinary. Each night, as darkness descended and shadows began to dance ominously on the walls, an unsettling sense of unease crept into my heart, wrapping around me like a cold shroud. I vividly recall the first time I stepped into the security office. The walls were plastered with a series of bizarre and foreboding rules. Each rule sent chills racing down my spine, but I had no choice but to abide by them if I wanted to keep my job. The first rule was explicit: never make eye contact with anyone, regardless of the circumstances. The second rule warned against venturing to the 8th floor, which was ominously labeled as the Forbidden Zone, a place shrouded in mystery and dread. The third rule mandated absolute silence during certain hours, especially from midnight to 2 in the morning, when the atmosphere felt particularly charged. The final rule was chilling: if you ever feel like you're being watched, whatever you do, don't look back. In the initial nights of my employment, I did my utmost to adhere to these rules. The hours felt especially long, and the oppressive silence surrounding me was unnerving. With every movement, my footsteps echoed in the empty corridors, as if the building itself was reminding me of the isolation and terror that enveloped this place. Occasionally, I would hear whispers, faint and distant, like echoes from deep within the walls. I tried to convince myself it was merely the wind playing tricks on my mind, but the fear simmering inside me refused to settle. As time passed, I began to notice subtle yet unsettling changes in my surroundings. Each time I walked past the stairwell leading to the 8th floor, I was hit by a bone-chilling cold that seemed to seep into my very bones, as if something unseen was beckoning me to venture upward. Deep down, I knew I shouldn't ascend those stairs, but curiosity surged within me like an uncontrollable tide. Each time I passed that rusty iron door, I found myself stopping, unable to resist the urge to wonder what secrets lay hidden behind it, waiting to be discovered. One fateful night, during a shift change, a colleague shared a terrifying incident that had occurred on the 8th floor. A few years prior, a security guard had mysteriously vanished during his night shift, and all that was ever found was his uniform and a rusty key. Ever since that chilling event, the 8th floor had been sealed off, and no one dared to venture up there. Hearing that story heightened my anxiety, casting a long shadow over my thoughts, but I chose to ignore the warnings and continued my work, determined to prove my courage. As the night deepened and the hours dragged on, I started to feel the presence of unseen eyes watching my every move. Whenever I sat in the security office, peering nervously into the dark corridor through the window, I always felt something lurking in the shadows, waiting. My palms would begin to sweat, and my heart would race in response to the oppressive atmosphere. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination running wild, but the feeling only grew stronger, a relentless weight pressing down on me. One particularly haunting night, I dozed off in the security office, only to be jolted awake by a piercing metallic sound that sliced through the silence. I sat up abruptly. The stillness around me was deafening, broken only by the faint flicker of the light at the end of the corridor. A sense of unease washed over me, compelling me to investigate the source of the noise. With my heart pounding like a drum in my chest, I stepped out of the security office, my footsteps echoing loudly in the empty hallway, amplifying my growing dread. As I approached the stairwell leading to the 8th floor, the chilling sensation hit me again, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, but ultimately, I decided to venture up and see what was happening. I knew it was against the rules, yet I couldn't resist the insistent pull of curiosity. Each step on the stairs felt like a warning, a reminder of the danger that lay ahead, yet I pressed on, driven by an inexplicable urge to uncover the truth. The 8th-floor corridor was cloaked in darkness and cold, with peeling oil paintings hanging on the walls, their faded colors and cracked surfaces seemingly telling the stories of this place's haunted past. I walked slowly. The silence around me was so thick it felt like it was suffocating me, wrapping me in a cocoon of dread. Just then, I heard a whisper, muffled and distant, as if it was calling my name, beckoning me to listen. "Come back." The voice was soft yet eerie, a chilling sound that seemed to drift from behind me. I spun around in a panic, but there was nothing there, only the oppressive darkness. Fear surged through me like an unstoppable tidal wave, and I felt trapped in an invisible cage, unable to escape the growing terror. Realizing it was time to leave the 8th floor, I turned to make my escape, but as I did, I noticed a shadow at the end of the corridor. The shadow slowly approached, seeming to draw closer and closer to me. Panic set in, and I desperately tried to run, but my feet felt as if they were glued to the ground, paralyzed by fear. In that moment, I remembered the final rule: if you feel watched, don't look back. I closed my eyes and stumbled backward, trying to escape the encroaching shadow. I kept repeating the rules in my mind, but the fear left me feeling trapped with nowhere to go. Just when I thought I was at the end of my rope, a wave of intense cold washed over me, as if something had brushed past me, sending shivers down my spine. I snapped my eyes open and found myself back in the security office. Everything around me was quiet, almost too quiet. My heart was still racing, and my palms were clammy with sweat. I knew what I had experienced was real, but I couldn't share it with anyone, for fear that no one would believe me and I would be deemed insane. In the following days, my condition worsened. Each night, as darkness fell and the world outside grew silent, I felt an invisible weight pressing down on me, like a ghostly hand was squeezing my throat tighter and tighter. I started to question whether I had truly seen those things or if it was all merely a figment of my imagination, a trick of the mind brought on by stress and fear. One night, while sifting through old files in the security office, I stumbled upon a report concerning the 8th floor. The file detailed the mysterious case of the missing guard, and the last entry revealed that in the days leading up to his disappearance, he had repeatedly mentioned feeling watched, as if something sinister was lurking just out of sight. Reading this sent a jolt through me, as if I had finally grasped a crucial piece of the puzzle that had been eluding me. I realized that following those rules wasn't just for my safety, it was also meant to protect the entities that roamed in the dark, entities that seemed to thrive on fear. With this newfound understanding, I became even more cautious in my work, doing my best to avoid any actions that might provoke those lurking shadows. Yet, the fear lingered, an ever-present shadow that I couldn't shake off, haunting my every step. Working nights became increasingly difficult, each corner filled with an unsettling energy that made my skin crawl. I started silently reciting the rules in my mind, trying to maintain some semblance of calm. But not long after, I once again heard the whispers, this time clearer, as if they were right next to me, invading my thoughts. "You can't leave." The voice was deep and sinister, sending my heart sinking into the depths of despair once more. At that moment, the lights in the security office flickered a few times and then went out, plunging me into absolute darkness. I was engulfed in shadows, despair flooding my heart and mind, threatening to consume me entirely. I knew I had to escape this place, but I had no idea how to confront whatever was lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to falter. My palms began to sweat profusely, and fear enveloped me like a suffocating blanket. Just as I was about to bolt out of the security office, the door suddenly swung open, and a vague, indistinct figure appeared in the doorway, shrouded in darkness. I couldn't make out what it was, but a wave of intense cold washed over me, chilling me to the bone. My body instinctively recoiled, and I kept silently pleading with myself to stick to the rules, to remember the warnings that had been drilled into me. Yet, that figure slowly approached, as if it were trying to pull me into the abyss of darkness that lay beyond the threshold. I struggled fiercely, repeating the last rule in my mind like a mantra. At that moment, a wave of overwhelming fear crashed over me, as if an invisible force was pushing me toward the dark, urging me to succumb to the terror. I shut my eyes tightly, praying I could escape it all, escape the relentless grip of fear that threatened to drag me under. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself back in the security office. Everything around me was silent once more. My heart was still racing, and my palms were damp with sweat, but I knew this wasn't the end of my ordeal. I had to keep following those rules, clinging to them like a lifeline to survive in this dark and foreboding place. From that point on, I worked even more cautiously, trying my best to avoid those forbidden areas that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. Every time night fell, I felt that invisible pressure, as if a ghostly hand was still squeezing my throat, reminding me of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. I knew that only by adhering to the rules could I hope to survive in this terrifying place, where the unseen watcher awaited in the depths of the darkness. It was the sweltering summer of 1983 when I unwittingly stumbled into the chilling nightmare that would forever haunt me and shadow my thoughts. I had just returned from what could only be described as a mundane, uneventful day at the precinct. Even as a detective, the most thrilling case that had crossed my desk that day had involved a local kid caught red-handed stealing candy bars from the corner store. I couldn't have anticipated how quickly that monotony would be shattered. But that evening, as I stepped into my office, a persistent sense of unease pulsed in the air around me, a feeling settling uneasily in my gut that something dark and sinister loomed ominously on the horizon, ready to disrupt the normalcy of my life. Without warning, the call came in like a thunderclap splitting the stillness of the night. A frantic voice on the other end detailed a grisly scene at a remote campsite straddling the border between Kentucky and Tennessee, a region known more for its natural beauty than for the horrors that now unfolded within its depths. A group of campers had been found, or rather, what was left of them. The dispatch was brief but harrowing enough to send a bone-chilling shiver down my spine, wrapping tightly around my heart and squeezing it with fear. Sensing the urgency of the situation, I grabbed my things with haste and rushed out. I could feel my heart beating like a war drum in my chest as I drove toward the isolated patch of woods, the sun slipping below the horizon. When I finally arrived at the campsite, the sun was just beginning to set, casting an eerie and foreboding glow over the dense forest. Flashing lights dotted the landscape like fireflies as forensic teams worked tirelessly and meticulously, documenting the horrendous coordinates of death that lay sprawled before them. My partner, Detective Harris, was already there, his expression grim and his features taut with tension as he approached me, his eyes troubled. "Connor," he began, his voice low and shaky, a tremor of fear breaking through his attempts to maintain composure. "You won't believe what we found out here." The sight that met my eyes was enough to freeze the blood in my veins. They had uncovered the remains of 4 campers, their bodies arranged grotesquely between the trees in a macabre display that defied explanation. Blood smeared across the bark of the towering oaks, painting a gruesome portrait of despair and violence, and the oppressive silence of the woods enveloped the scene like a heavy shroud, numbing all sounds. I fought to keep my composure, but the sight was enough to rattle even the most hardened investigator inside me, forcing the bile to rise in my throat. As we examined the area, a truly chilling discovery was made. Claw marks, deep, jagged, and unmistakably animalistic, scored the trees, and tufts of dark, matted fur were scattered throughout the clearing. My mind swirled with confusion as I struggled to make sense of the evidence. The locals whispered of a legend, a fearsome creature they referred to as the Dogman, said to haunt these very woods, a harbinger of death and despair, an embodiment of nightmares. Skepticism bubbled within me, wrestling against the instinctive fear that clawed at my gut. but I couldn't shake the primal urge to believe that something otherworldly lurked just out of sight in the dense shadows surrounding us. That night, a sense of foreboding settled heavily in my chest, making it nearly impossible to breathe. Sleep was elusive, a distant luxury as I replayed the gruesome details of the crime scene in my mind over and over again, the grotesque images burning into my consciousness like a brand. Something was undeniably off. Beyond the horror of the murders, there was a palpable presence in the air that made my skin crawl in pure terror. I felt compelled to confront this darkness head-on, to seek out the source of the nightmare that had intruded upon our lives. The following day, my resolve solidified. I gathered the team for a critical meeting. "I want to perform a contact ritual," I declared, my voice steady despite the fluttering anxiety churning in my stomach like a restless beast. Harris looked at me as if I had lost my mind, yet I could see the flicker of intrigue dance in his eyes, betraying his own curiosity about the unknown. "Contact what?" "The dogman," he scoffed, raising an eyebrow. But I could sense that the doubt in his voice was not as steadfast as he wanted me to believe. Beneath the surface, his curiosity simmered. "I want to communicate with whatever this thing is," I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. "If it's out there, we need to understand it, to know what we're dealing with." After much heated debate, the team reluctantly agreed to my proposal, apprehensive but intrigued. That night, we ventured into the heart of the woods, armed with torches, cameras, and an assortment of supplies for the ritual, each step feeling heavier than the last as if the woods themselves were reluctant to let us pass. The forest was alive with the sounds of nature as we set up in a small clearing. The moonlight filtered through the branches above, casting ghostly shadows that danced eerily around us. I could feel an electric energy crackling in the air, thick with anticipation and dread, a tangible tension that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. We formed a circle, candles flickering softly, light and shadow merging together as restless spirits in a dance of life and death, as I began to recite the incantation I had meticulously researched. The words felt heavy and foreign on my tongue, each syllable invoking an ancient power I could scarcely comprehend in my rational mind. As the last echo of my voice faded into the night, a heavy silence enveloped us, suffocating and oppressive. My heart raced, pounding in my chest like a war drum, every beat echoing the urgency of our purpose as I strained to hear even the faintest rustle of leaves or the whisper of wind. And then, as if summoned by my words, I heard it, a low growl, reverberating through the darkness, prickling at the fine hairs on my arms and sending a cold wave of fear cascading down my spine. "What was that?" whispered Harris, his eyes wide, scanning the trees with a bird-like intensity, filled with both terror and wonder. It came again, closer this time, a deep rumble that settled heavily in the pit of my stomach, setting my teeth on edge and sending adrenaline surging through my veins. Shadows flickered at the periphery of our vision, and I knew, deep in my bones, that whatever was lurking out there was watching us intently, studying our every move as if we were nothing more than pawns in a much larger game. I clutched the flashlight tightly, directing its beam into the night like a fraying beacon in the encroaching void, but the light merely illuminated empty branches and the unsettling movement of the wind among the leaves as they whispered secrets. Suddenly, a massive shape erupted through the underbrush, filling my vision in an overwhelming rush and sending adrenaline coursing through my veins like ice water. It was a creature taller than any man I had ever seen, covered in dark, matted fur that seemed to absorb the light, with glowing yellow eyes that pierced the night like twin lanterns. The dogman stood there, defiant and powerful, its elongated snout snapping at the air, the low growl echoing deep from within its chest, resonating through our bones and vibrating the very air around us. Instinct kicked in, prompting us to flee, to scatter and escape into the dark, but my legs felt like lead, immobilized by a primordial fear I had never known. I was rooted to the spot, captivated by the primal power emanating from the creature, a mix of terror and awe washing over me. It circled us, a predator, evaluating its prey with an intelligence that was unnerving. I remembered the camera in my backpack. Perhaps capturing evidence would be enough to piece together this nightmare. As I fumbled through the pack, the dogman's gaze locked onto me, pinning me in place as an inexplicable chill washed over my body, freezing me in my tracks. Stealing my nerves, I aimed the camera and clicked the shutter, the flash illuminating the creature momentarily, casting bizarre shadows against the trees. It paused, its head tilting slightly, a mix of curiosity and menace swirling in its otherworldly eyes, as if deciphering my very soul. Then it lunged forward, a blinding blur of fur and gleaming fangs. Panic surged through the group like wildfire as they scattered in different directions, but I stood frozen, completely captivated and entranced, caught in the eyes of the beast. "You shouldn't be here!" I shouted, my voice cracking, my breathless plea echoing into the night. "We mean no harm!" The words spilled from my lips like a desperate prayer, an instinctual attempt to reach across the chasm that separated us. The creature halted abruptly, its menacing snarl fading into a haunting silence that enveloped us. It seemed to ponder my words for a fleeting moment, its breath heavy and labored as it measured my sincerity. For that brief instant, an understanding seemed to bridge the abyss between our worlds, and I felt an overwhelming sense of sorrow radiate from it, as if it too recognized the darkness lining our fates. Before I could fully process the magnitude of that moment, the dogman took off into the trees, a blur of motion vanishing deeper into the woods. I snapped back to reality, jumping into action, my instincts kicking in as I chased after my colleagues, fueled by adrenaline and an urgency born from the fear of what lay behind us. As we regrouped, our eyes wide with a mixture of terror and exhilaration, I recounted the encounter. We had witnessed something unfathomable, a glimpse into a hidden realm that teetered on the edge of our understanding, a truth that bloomed in the shadow of our ignorance. But as we stood there, panting and shaken, a chilling realization dawned on me like a dark cloud bursting over us. We hadn't just encountered a creature, we had inadvertently tapped into something far darker and more sinister than we had anticipated, an ancient presence that had been disturbed by our intrusion into its territory. Despite the evidence we gathered, I understood, with a sinking dread, that we had only scratched the surface of a mystery that ran much deeper than our comprehension. Days passed, and the investigation continued, but an unsettling peace was never to be found. Each night, I would awaken drenched in sweat, the growl of the dogman echoing in my mind like a ghost that refused to rest. Reports of missing persons continued to trickle in, darkening my thoughts, and I couldn't shake the haunting feeling that the creature was still out there, lurking just beyond the periphery of our reality, waiting for its moment to strike again. As summer melted into fall, the news of the gruesome murders faded slowly from the headlines, but for me, the horror remained a living nightmare that consumed my very being. My evenings became suffocatingly silent, with my thoughts endlessly spiraling, consumed by the echoes of the woods and the haunting presence of the dogman that lingered ever closer. I knew that the encounter had only opened a dark door to something insidious and terrifying. I rummaged through my notes at home, piecing together stories of other unfortunate souls who had encountered the creature, each tale growing more chilling than the last. Some claimed to have felt a connection, a bond forged in terror and understanding, yet others walked away forever changed, tainted by shadows of their former selves that whispered of unspeakable horrors. What had I awakened in those woods? As I stood alone in my office one lonely night, panic and dread rising within, I glanced out the window into the darkness, instinctively feeling that familiar prickle of anxiety running down my spine like an icy snake. Just then, something caught my eye, a flash of yellow in the distance that sent my heart lurching into my throat. My breath caught as I felt that same chilling flutter creep over me, a haunting reminder that I was not alone. The creature was still watching. The nightmare I had hoped to contain was far from over. It was waiting, patient, hungry, and far more significant than any of us had understood. This was only the beginning of my descent into a world filled with darkness and horror. With the weight of that thought hanging heavy in the air, I returned to my papers, my heart racing as I faced the reality of my situation. I had to prepare, to steel my mind and soul, because in the world of shadows, in the thickets of ancient woods, there are always things lurking just beyond the light, and this one was not finished with me yet. My name is Ben Harold, and I work as a city sewer inspector. It's not the most glamorous job in the world, and many people think I'm just stuck dealing with the dirtiest of tasks. However, it's folks like us, the unsung heroes of the urban landscape, who keep the city running smoothly and efficiently. What many don't realize is that our work is crucial for everyone's safety and health, often preventing disasters that could arise from neglected infrastructure. In this line of work, some rules are deeply ingrained and almost serve as the foundation of what we do. The first and most important rule is to always work in teams. Venturing solo into certain areas is a definite no-go because there are all sorts of hidden dangers lurking around every corner. I've heard some truly terrifying stories about colleagues who broke these rules, like mysteriously vanishing without a trace or being discovered in some dark corner, their faces unrecognizable and filled with terror. We also receive stern warnings that if we ever come across a body, we should never approach it and must report it immediately. It feels like every rule is hiding a dark secret behind it, a chilling reminder of the risks we face. One day, I received a job to inspect an old sewer line that had been neglected for years. Recent heavy storms had wreaked havoc on the drainage system, and they wanted to see if this particular line was still operational and safe to use. I teamed up with my coworkers, Charlie and Stuart, for the inspection. Even though I was feeling a deep sense of unease in the pit of my stomach, I knew we needed to stick together and not let fear take over our minds. We suited up in our waterproof gear and made our way to the sewer entrance. The smell was absolutely nauseating, a putrid mix of decay and dampness that was hard to breathe in and even harder to ignore. The tunnel was dimly lit, narrow, and seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. With every step we took, my gut churned with a sense of foreboding that I couldn't quite place, as if the very air around us was thick with impending doom. As we walked through the sewer, the silence was unsettling, oppressive even, and I could hear everyone's breathing mixed with the gentle whispers of the flowing water. Suddenly, Charlie stopped, pointing at a crack in the ceiling. "Do you guys hear that? Sounds like something's moving," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Hanging from where Charlie pointed were some spider webs, looking like eerie fingers reaching out towards us. Strangely, my attention was drawn to the fragile web, and for a moment, I found myself staring at it, feeling as if something was staring back at us from within its tangled strands. But Charlie quickly urged us to keep moving, sensing the heavy atmosphere that was beginning to suffocate us all. After about 10 minutes of walking, we came across an old valve we needed to check. When we turned it, it emitted a screeching noise that echoed through the tunnel, and suddenly, the whole sewer trembled beneath our feet. At that moment, Stuart coughed and stepped back, a cold sweat beading on his forehead. He turned to leave, but in an instant, the space around us felt icy cold, as if the very essence of warmth had been sucked away. "There's something wrong with this place," Charlie said in a low, tense voice, his eyes darting around nervously. Just then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of a shadow zip past us, seeming to stop in the corner at the mouth of the tunnel. I turned back, my heart racing and pounding in my chest. Then I heard Stuart scream. His voice was filled with desperation, as if something had caught him in its grasp. I only remember a massive dark figure lunging at him, followed by a horrifying ripping sound that echoed through the tunnel. The metallic smell of rust and blood filled my nostrils, overwhelming my senses, and my instincts kicked in, urging me to retreat, but Charlie grabbed me tightly. "Don't move!" Charlie's eyes were wide with fear, He sensed the threat looming over us as well. But it was too late. The shadow surged towards us with terrifying speed, and Stuart was swallowed up by the dark, leaving only the echoes of his screams and struggles behind, haunting us as we fled. We bolted, racing out of that strange, twisted space, panic propelling us towards safety. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that massive shadow, a grotesque monster with spider-like features, glimmering with an unnatural gleam in its eyes, forever etched in my memory. Once we made it back to the surface, Charlie and I were gasping for air, our hearts racing and our minds reeling from the horror we had just witnessed. We couldn't continue our work after what had just happened. We had uncovered a haunting secret, and yet it was one I struggled to articulate to anyone. I reported Stuart's disappearance up the ladder, but the higher-ups didn't buy our story, insisting that no creatures could exist in the sewers, dismissing our fears as mere figments of our imagination. Despite my best efforts to make them understand the gravity of the situation, everyone opted for silence, choosing to ignore the warnings that loomed over us. Fear was like an invisible knife cutting into my soul, leaving me feeling raw and exposed. I started revisiting those rules about never entering certain areas alone, pondering the warnings that seemed to beckon a grim fate, a fate I was now all too familiar with. Weeks went by, and Stuart was still missing, his absence hanging over us like a dark cloud. Charlie and I were trapped in this endless nightmare, unable to escape the memories of that fateful day. I had to return to my job, even with dread gnawing at my insides like a ravenous beast. But deep down, I knew I had to confront that monster to free myself from the grip of my own mind, to find closure for both Stuart and myself. Finally, I decided to sneak back into the sewer late one night, determined to uncover the truth that had eluded me for so long. Armed with a flashlight and sturdy rubber boots, I ventured into the consuming darkness, my heart pounding in my chest. The entire tunnel felt controlled by some eerie force. The oppressive presence of spider webs around me made it hard to breathe, and the low sound of water echoed from all directions, a constant reminder of the danger that surrounded me. I could feel something watching me, lurking in the shadows, silently praying I wouldn't see Stuart's figure again. Deep down, I navigated through the twisted passageways until I found that valve again, and only then did I realize the hidden secrets lurking deeper in this sewer, secrets that had been buried for far too long. I opened the valve, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. The area was filled with giant spider nests, seemingly waiting for prey to come by, their grotesque forms casting long shadows in the dim light. In the center, a blurred body lay, glaring white against vibrant red. It was my missing colleague, Stuart. The wounds on him were horrifying, dark webs constricting him, as if parasites slowly consumed him, draining him of life and hope. As I stood there, frozen in shock, the giant monster appeared once more, blood-soaked claws reaching for me, gleaming with a cold cruelty that sent shivers down my spine. I turned to run, but it was closing in, and the screams echoed once again, tearing at my very soul, pulling me into the depths of despair. The whirlpool in the darkness called to me like a bottomless pit, and I couldn't escape. I had to face my own moment of truth, to confront the horror that had taken so much from me. Fear surged anew, my body engulfed in anger and despair, a potent mix that threatened to consume me whole. In the end, silence became my choice. Under the shadow of this monster, all my pain and hopelessness merged into infinite darkness, leaving me feeling utterly defeated. When I made it back above ground, everything felt different, almost alien. The city lights flickered strangely, and the rhythm of life felt oddly disjointed, as if I had returned to a world that no longer recognized me. I recalled those forgotten rules, the warnings I once ignored, the lessons that had gone unheeded. That sewer had turned into my personal nightmare. My existence will forever be intertwined with those buried secrets that lay hidden in the dark. Now, every day, I find myself lingering on the edges of the sewer, frequently haunted by thoughts of Stuart and that monster that took him from us. Whenever I see spider webs and old valves, a chill runs down my spine, a reminder of the terror that lurks just beneath the surface. Yet, I continue to work through the fear because I know some secrets are destined to remain buried in the darkness, waiting for the next unsuspecting soul to stumble upon them. I never imagined that I would find myself working the night shift at a remote country airport. The job listing seemed almost too perfect when I initially came across it. It promised a tranquil setting, minimal oversight, and the allure of solitude I had been craving in my life. Yet, when I pulled into the humble airport parking lot for my first shift, an eerie atmosphere engulfed me, settling around me like a thick fog, and it quickly became apparent that this airport harbored secrets far beyond my comprehension and imagination. This small airport consisted of only one runway and a single aging terminal that looked like it hadn't been touched or updated in decades, perhaps not since the 1970s. The flickering fluorescent lights cast long, ghostly shadows that danced across the walls, and an unsettling silence hung in the air, broken only by the faint hum of the overhead fans and the occasional rustle of a breeze through the cracked windows. As I walked through the terminal, my eyes were drawn to a bulletin board adorned with a jumble of notices, flyers, and other miscellaneous papers, but one particular document sent a chill racing down my spine, a handwritten list of rules. The rules were scrawled hastily in ink that was slightly smudged, indicating they had been up for some time, and the message they conveyed was unsettling. Among the usual safety protocols, which one might expect in any workplace, I found strange and cryptic directives that made my heart race and my skin prickle. Do not speak to Elizabeth after midnight. Simon is to be avoided unless absolutely necessary. If you hear the sirens, lock all doors and remain silent. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I absorbed the details of these warnings, my mind flooded with questions. Who were these people, Elizabeth and Simon? What could provoke such ominous restrictions? And why were they enforced so strictly? As the clock struck 10 p.m., my shift officially began, and the anticipation of the approaching midnight made me even more anxious. I decided to spend my time familiarizing myself with the terminal, which felt increasingly unsettling as I wandered through the dimly lit hallways. It wasn't long before I encountered Simon, the janitor. He was an imposing figure, tall and lanky, with a gaunt face and sunken eyes that seemed to reflect a lifetime filled with stories better left untold. He was mopping the floor in silence when I approached, and as I did, he flicked his gaze up at me, a fleeting expression of something, fear, maybe, crossing his face before he resumed his task with an unsettling intensity. I hesitated, the rules echoing in the back of my mind, but I felt an undeniable urge to inquire about Elizabeth. Who is Elizabeth? I ventured, doing my best to keep my tone casual and light. He paused momentarily, gripping his mop tightly as though it were a lifeline. You shouldn't talk about her. Just don't, he replied, his voice barely rising above a whisper. I could sense the palpable fear in his eyes, and it creeped over me like ice water coursing through my veins. The hours slipped by, stretching infinitely as the night wore on, and I noticed Elizabeth for the first time. She sat alone in the waiting area, her long, dark hair cascading over her shoulders like a veil, her gaze fixed and distant as she studied the flickering lights above her. There was something profoundly haunting about her presence, almost as if she were a ghost trapped in a world that no longer acknowledged her. I felt an inexplicable pull toward her, a mix of concern and fascination, but the rules rang in my mind like a siren's call, warning me to maintain my distance and avoid her at all costs. But the atmosphere shifted dramatically at midnight. The lights began to flicker more violently, casting erratic shadows across the walls, and a low, ominous hum filled the air like a distant thunderstorm approaching. I watched as Elizabeth's demeanor underwent a remarkable transformation. She seemed to literally come alive, her eyes igniting with a strange intensity that I couldn't quite reconcile. Suddenly, She stood up and walked toward the exit, her movements fluid and graceful, glancing back at me with a knowing smile that sent a rush of adrenaline through my veins. My heart was racing, and against all better judgment, I found my feet moving forward, compelled to follow her outside. The night air greeted me like an unwelcome companion, thick and heavy, enveloping us as the runway stretched before us like a long shadow under the pale glow of the moon. Elizabeth turned toward me, the playful spirit in her eyes replaced with something darker and more serious. "You shouldn't have followed me," she said softly, her voice low and melodic yet deeply unsettling. "They don't like it when you break the rules." "Who are they?" I managed to ask, my curiosity slowly overcoming the growing sense of dread that gripped my heart. "The ones who watch," she said cryptically, her gaze shifting toward the darkened corners of the airport. "They're always watching you, waiting for you to slip up." Just then, the wailing sound of sirens pierced the silence of the night, echoing through the terminal like a ghostly alarm. A wave of panic surged through me as I remembered the rule about locking the doors. The instinct to flee clashed with my concern for Elizabeth, and I turned to run back inside, but she grabbed my arm, her hold surprisingly strong. "You can't go in there." "Not now. They'll know you're here," she insisted urgently, her eyes wide with fear. "Who will know?" I shouted, the tremor in my voice revealing my escalating fear. Before she could answer, the lights flickered violently again, plunging us into a brief moment of darkness. When the lights returned, Elizabeth had vanished. My heart raced as I stood there, frozen in place, the cold night air wrapping around me like a shroud of isolation. I stumbled back to the entrance, locked the door behind me, and desperately tried to make sense of the confusion and fear swirling inside my mind. The remainder of the night became a blur of anxiety and dread. I attempted to distract myself and focus on my responsibilities, but every creak of the aging building and every flicker of the lights above sent my thoughts spiraling into a hysteria of panic. I checked the time. It was 1 a.m., and the oppressive weight of the rules descended upon me like a heavy fog, making it hard to breathe. Determined to find clarity, I sought out Simon, hoping he would provide some insight into the bizarre circumstances that had unfolded. I found him in the break room, his face pale and worn, displaying an almost haunted look. "Simon, what's going on? Who is Elizabeth? What did she mean by they?" I pressed him, desperation creeping into my voice as I searched his expression for answers. He glanced around nervously, as though the walls themselves had ears. "You need to leave," he urged, his voice trembling and low. "Tonight. You don't understand what you're dealing with. This isn't a safe place." "Leave? I just started. I can't simply walk away from this," I protested, feeling frustration boiling over within me. "Then you'll regret your decision," he warned, his eyes wide and filled with fear. "You have no idea what happens here after midnight, what lurks in the shadows." A surge of defiance coursed through me, pushing back against the fear gnawing at me from all sides. I had come this far. There was no way I was backing down now. "I'm staying, Simon. I want to know the truth behind all of this," I declared, my voice resolute. He shook his head in response, his expression filled with pity. "You'll find out soon enough," he said softly, almost sorrowfully. As the hours dragged on, the weight of impending doom hung in the air like a storm ready to break. I busied myself with cleaning and organizing, yet the atmosphere remained thick with tension, reminiscent of a predator lurking just out of sight. I could feel the shadows closing in around me, and the sirens continued to wail, their haunting cries sending fresh waves of panic coursing through my veins. Around 3 a.m., I heard a gentle tapping sound at the window, pulling me from my thoughts. I turned to see Elizabeth's face lit by the dim light of the terminal, her expression infused with urgency and fear. My heart pounded as I rushed to the window and opened it slightly, anxiety gnawing at my insides. Please, you have to help me, she whispered, nervously glancing over her shoulder, her eyes wide with terror. They're coming for me. I need you to listen. Who's coming? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, barely able to mask my growing dread. The ones who watch us. They can't know you're involved with me. You have to stay away from me, she continued, her voice urgent yet pleading, as if imploring me to understand the gravity of her warning. Before I could respond, a loud crash echoed through the terminal, and the lights flickered out yet again. My heart raced as I scrambled for my phone, the screen momentarily illuminating the darkness. Shadows moved ominously in the distance, dark figures emerging from the corners of the terminal like monstrous apparitions. Terror surged within me as I comprehended that we were not alone. Get away from the window! I shouted, pulling it closed just as a shadowy figure lunged toward me. The glass rattled violently in its frame, and panic surged through my entire being as I backed away, breath quickening, disbelief clawing its way through my rational mind. Run! Elizabeth screamed from outside, her voice filled with desperation and fear. You have to get out of here. They're coming! I hesitated once more, torn between the instinct to flee to safety and the desire to help her in whatever way I could. But with the shadows closing in around me, a drowning sense of urgency overcame my reluctance. I bolted toward the back exit, my heart pounding a furious rhythm in my chest. The sirens blared once again, a deafening cacophony that echoed like an alarm through the terminal. As I reached the door, I glanced back one final time. Elizabeth had vanished, swallowed by the darkness that enveloped this haunted place. Steeling myself, I burst through the exit, the cool night air hitting me like a washing wave. I dashed toward my car, my mind racing with the overwhelming weight of fear, confusion, and adrenaline. Fumbling with my keys, my hands shook violently as I struggled to unlock the door. Just as I managed to finally get it open, I heard a voice behind me, low and foreboding. You shouldn't have come here, it said. I spun around and saw Simon standing there, his face grave with an expression that filled me with trepidation. You need to leave now, he urged, looking over his shoulder as though expecting something to emerge from the shadows. They'll be looking for you. Who are they? My frustration boiled over as panic clawed at my insides. What exactly is happening here? They're the ones who keep the balance in this place, he said in a hushed tone. They don't like outsiders. You've seen too much already. A chill rushed through me as realization washed over me. What do you mean? I stammered, my mind racing. Before Simon could respond, the shadows appeared from the depths of the terminal, dark figures gliding through the night with an otherworldly grace, their presence unnerving and deeply unsettling. Terror washed over me in waves as I scrambled into my car, slamming the door shut like a fragile barricade against whatever horrors lurked just outside. I turned the key in the ignition, heart racing as the engine roared to life, breaking the oppressive silence that surrounded me. Get out of here! Simon shouted, his eyes wide with genuine fear. But the anxiety coursing through my veins pushed me to back out of the parking lot quickly, glancing in the rearview mirror with each heartbeat, dreading what I might see. The figures were closing in, their forms flickering and shifting in the dim light of the airport. I tore down the dirt road leading away from the airport, adrenaline coursing through my body as I fled from the chaos and darkness. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel their dark presence lingering in the air, like a shadow that threatened to swallow me whole. As I drove further away, I tried desperately to process everything that had just transpired. The airport, the strange rules, the intoxicating allure of Elizabeth, the palpable warnings from Simon, they all blended together into a surreal nightmare that felt disturbingly real. But deep down, I knew I had stumbled into a dark world I didn't comprehend, a place where the rules were not mere guidelines, but lifelines, etched in a language of fear and survival. Eventually, I reached the main road, the familiar sights of the town materializing before me like a distant memory. But even as I drove toward familiarity, I felt the heavy weight of the airport's darkness pressing down upon me, an unwanted companion that lingered in my thoughts. I had escaped, yes, but at what cost? The shadows of that midnight airport would undoubtedly haunt me, a reminder of the dark secrets that lay hidden in the night. And as I cast one last look into the rearview mirror, chills traveled down my spine. I could have sworn I saw a figure standing at the edge of the runway, motionless and watching me leave, a silent guardian of the darkness I had narrowly escaped but was unlikely to forget. It was a night like any other, drenched in the hazy glow of neon lights and echoed laughter spilling from nearby bars. I had indulged far more than I should have, the aroma of whiskey clinging to my senses and a buzz of reckless abandon propelling me forward. The streets were eerily quiet as I stumbled along, my mind fogged by the effects of too many drinks, when I suddenly spotted an old, creaky bus parked at the curb. Its paint was chipped and faded, and the flickering sign above the windshield read Midnight Express. It was the kind of sight that should have sent shivers down my spine, but instead, an inexplicable curiosity drew me closer. With a mix of hesitation and intrigue, I climbed aboard, the rusty steps groaning under my weight as I ascended. The interior was dimly lit, steeped in an unsettling atmosphere that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I found an empty seat near the back and settled in, oblivious to the strange energy surrounding me. The driver, a slender man with an otherworldly smile, nodded at me in greeting. His eyes, however, held a depth that sent chills down my spine, as if they could see right through me. "Where to, friend?" he asked, his voice smooth yet unsettling, like velvet laced with poison. "Just around, just a ride, I guess." My slurred words barely escaped my lips, and I could feel the weight of my inebriation pulling at my consciousness. As the bus roared to life, I felt an unsettling shift in my chest. I was trapped, a passenger on a ghostly voyage through the night, and the realization sent a wave of panic coursing through me. The bus lurched forward, and I caught sight of the other passengers. They varied in appearance, from a boisterous party girl adorned in glittering attire to an elderly man clutching his cane, sagging in his seat as if the weight of the world rested on his frail shoulders. There was a moody teenager in the corner absorbed in his phone, a couple whispering conspiratorially, and a man who looked like he lived on the streets, empty bottles scattered around him like fallen leaves. As the bus rolled on, the chatter around me took on a strange cadence, almost melodic, as if we were part of some bizarre symphony. The party girl leaned over, her laughter like tinkling glass, inviting yet unsettling. "You should join us. We're having the time of our lives." She gestured to the empty seats beside her, which seemed to glow invitingly under the dim lights, as if promising a night filled with excitement and adventure. "Come on, what's stopping you? Life's too short." Her voice was intoxicating, pulling me in like a siren's call, urging me to abandon my inhibitions. I glanced at the driver, who met my gaze with a knowing smirk, his eyes glinting with something sinister. He seemed to relish the chaos unfolding in the bus, feeding off the energy that crackled in the air. I could feel the weight of the atmosphere pressing down, urging me to succumb to their allure and join in the revelry. But something in the back of my mind screamed caution. I could sense this ride was more than just a journey. It felt like a threshold, a point of no return that I was teetering on the edge of. The bus came to a sudden stop, breaking my trance and sending me jolting forward. The elderly man with the cane had shifted in his seat, a look of desperation on his face that sent a chill through me. "Don't listen to them, young man. They want to take you away." His voice trembled, fear etched in his features, and I could see the truth of his words reflected in his haunted eyes. "Relax, old man. Come join us." The party girl retorted, her earlier charm morphing into an edge of menace. The atmosphere shifted, It was no longer just a lively party bus, it was a battleground of wills, and I felt the tension rising like a storm ready to break. I was torn between desires, the thrill of wild abandon they offered, and the instinct for survival clawing within me, urging me to escape this nightmare. I leaned back, attempting to gather my thoughts, when the bus door swung open, revealing a darkened landscape outside. Shadows danced at the edges of the night, creeping closer to the vehicle as if they were alive, waiting to snatch me away. The moody teenager finally spoke, his tone devoid of emotion. You can either live your life as a spectator or dive into the chaos. It's all a matter of perspective. His words resonated with me, but I didn't trust the distance between reality and the surreal world inside this bus. The driver shifted gears, accelerating into the darkness, and with every turn, the outside world morphed into a twisted reflection of itself, buildings bending at odd angles, the moon hanging ominously low, clouds swirling like dark spirits ready to descend upon us. Then came the laughter again, louder and more intense, lifting the spirits in the bus. The party girl dragged me to dance, her contagious energy wrapping around me like a warm blanket, enveloping me in a false sense of security. I fought to resist, but it was futile. I lost myself in the rhythm, the fear slowly melting away as the harmony enveloped me, drowning out the warnings in my mind. But the bus played tricks on my mind. The more I danced, the more distorted reality became. I glanced at the man at the front, a heavy drinker who seemed oblivious to the chaos around him. He joined in the laughter, a hollow echo reverberating through the bus. We're all just riders on this wild ride, chasing the next high, he slurred, and I could see the darkness creeping into his eyes, a reflection of the abyss that awaited us all. The elders were telling stories, curses and warnings whispered into the void, but I couldn't hear them anymore. The party girl beckoned me again, this time her eyes glowing with an unnatural light that sent a shiver down my spine. She whispered promises of euphoria and escape, of leaving behind the mundane world outside, luring me with the promise of a life unshackled from reality. Suddenly, the atmosphere took a shift. The bus lurched violently, sending everyone tumbling into each other. Laughter turned to screams as panic spread like wildfire. The driver's smile twisted into a grimace as he fought the wheel, the vehicle careening into the shadows, the darkness closing in around us. "Don't you dare!" The elderly man shouted, shaking with rage, his voice rising above the chaos. "You think you can drown us in your madness? This isn't just a joyride." I felt the gravity of the situation sink in, the weight of the reality crushing around me like a vice. The laughter echoed hollowly, now marred by the tension thickening the air. Shadows loomed larger, and I realized that the driver wasn't in control. We were spiraling into a void with no end in sight, trapped in a nightmare of our own making. The bus stopped abruptly, and with a resounding bang, the door flung open, revealing a void that whispered my name, taunting and teasing. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked in darkness, and an icy chill swept through the bus, freezing me in place. "Step into my realm," the figure beckoned, voice smooth as silk but corrupt as the night, wrapping around me like a noose. "Leave your worries behind. Embrace the unknown." The party girl reached for me, her face twisting into something grotesque, her beauty fading into a mask of horror. "Come on! Don't be a coward. You either take the plunge, or you'll drown in mediocrity." The boy in the corner smirked, scrolling through his phone, seemingly unfazed by the chaos erupting around us. The old man, however, was terrified, clutching at my arm with a grip that felt like a lifeline. "Don't listen to them. Stick to the rules, young man. That's how you can escape." As the tension reached its breaking point, I remembered the unspoken rules they had hinted at throughout the ride. Don't give in to the darkness, stay vigilant, don't let curiosity consume you. But temptation lay thick in the air, begging me to take a step forward, to surrender to the madness that beckoned. The party girl twisted her finger in the air, lighting a fire in the cramped space, and the heat washed over me like a wave. Join us! This ride could be yours forever. The contradictions and chaos enveloped me, fear against desire, consequence against thrill. I felt the pull of the void, the darkness enticing me closer, promising release from the mundane. But the old man's warning rang loud in my ears. The consequences could be dire, and I knew I had to resist. Summoning every ounce of strength, I rose from my seat and shouted, "No!" My voice echoed in the confined space, cutting through the noise that had consumed us. I refuse to let you take me. I'll carve my own path. The laughter stilled. The atmosphere shifted again as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. The driver's face soured, his grin faltering as shadows began to crawl away, retreating from the light of my defiance. The bus tremored as if the world itself was shaking, and I could feel the darkness retreating from my will. You think you can walk away? He snarled, venom dripping from his words, his eyes narrowing in fury. With a final force of will, I stepped back from the abyss, retreating into the safety of my decision. The void spat and hissed, threatening to engulf me, but the warmth of the light flooded back into the space. I could feel the pressure dissipating, pushing the darkness away as the bus jolted to a halt, the sounds of chaos fading into silence. I stumbled toward the door that seemed to shimmer with promise, a gateway back to reality. The party girl screamed in frustration, her figure fading into the shadows, her laughter turning into a wail of despair. You'll regret this. You'll be back. As I stepped into the night, the darkness receded behind me, and I found myself standing on the familiar street, the chaotic sounds of the city flooding my senses. Racked with adrenaline, I turned back, expecting to see the bus, but it had vanished, dissolved into the ether from whence it came, leaving no trace behind. Breathless and shaken, I staggered away, the echoes of the night's events still playing in my mind like a haunting melody. I had made my choice, but the curiosity lingered like an itch beneath my skin, a reminder of the darkness I had narrowly escaped. Deep down, I knew the bus still rested somewhere, waiting for its next passenger to lure into uncertainty, to tempt with the promise of exhilaration and escape. As I left the haunting memory behind, a nagging sensation tugged at my heart, a part of me forever enamored with the allure of the unknown, the tantalizing glimpses of another world that had danced before me during that fateful ride. The thrill of the unknown whispered to me, and I knew that the shadows would always beckon, waiting patiently for the next chance to draw me back into their depths. At a certain point in my life, something unforgettable happened that would stay with me forever. My friends and I, all of us driven by a sense of adventure, decided to embark on a backpacking trip to seek out what we referred to as the hidden place. We were a group that thrived on exploration, eager to escape the relentless noise and chaos of city life and immerse ourselves in the calming embrace of nature. So, on a bright and sunny morning, filled with excitement and anticipation, we set off on our journey, our spirits high and our minds racing with possibilities. As we ventured deeper into the wilderness, the atmosphere around us began to shift dramatically. The trees grew denser and taller, their branches intertwining overhead, while the sunlight filtering through the thick canopy seemed to be swallowed by the encroaching shadows. Despite the increasingly eerie environment, we tried to maintain our cheerful demeanor, cracking jokes and sharing laughter to ease the growing tension in the air. It wasn't until we found a clearing and set up camp in an open valley that things truly started to feel strange as the sun dipped below the horizon and night began to blanket the landscape. Gathered around the campfire, we listened to the occasional rustle of the wind and the crackling of the fire. Suddenly, I heard a distant cry, a sound that pierced the peaceful night, resembling the wailing of a baby. It was a sound so innocent and desperate that it sent chills racing down my spine. My heart sank into my stomach, and I exchanged puzzled and concerned glances with my friends, who wore similar expressions of unease and confusion. "Did you guys hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. Yeah, Rachel replied, her voice trembling with fear. There's no one out here. How could there possibly be a baby crying? Then, it seemed like the animals around us sensed the unease too. The birds stopped singing, and the occasional rustling of leaves made us feel even more trapped and vulnerable. Just then, we heard soft whispers coming from the bushes in the distance, as if a group of people were performing some kind of ritual. The atmosphere grew thick with tension, and curiosity began to pull us in. Out of sheer curiosity, we decided to creep closer to investigate. When we reached the edge of the bushes, the sight before me was something I would never forget for as long as I lived. Moonlight streamed through the leaves and illuminated the grass below, where several figures dressed in black robes stood in a perfect circle, softly chanting some kind of incantation. In the center of this eerie gathering was a tall figure draped in blue, who appeared to be conducting a mysterious and unsettling sacrifice. What the hell is this? I whispered, my voice barely escaping my lips. I don't know, but we should definitely get out of here, Tyler said, fear etched deeply on his face. Just as I was about to turn around and retreat, I heard that baby crying again, but this time it sounded even more heartbreaking and anguished. The figure in blue lifted a small, crying baby into the air, and the chanting around him grew louder, filled with a frenzied energy that made my skin crawl. My heart felt like it stopped beating. Fear washed over me like a tidal wave, and I could feel the air around us growing heavy, thick with dread. We need to leave, now! I shouted to my friends, but my voice was drowned out by the eerie sounds of the ritual. As the ritual continued, the people in black robes began to dance wildly, caught up in a bizarre frenzy that sent a wave of panic crashing over me. Their erratic movements made it hard to breathe. At that moment, I noticed a massive owl silently watching us from a nearby branch, its eyes glinting with something unnatural and otherworldly, and that gaze sent shivers down my spine, intensifying my fear. Just as we were about to back away and escape, Tyler suddenly stepped forward, trying to get a better look at the disturbing scene. Come on, let's go! I urged, my voice filled with urgency, but fate had other plans in store for us. A flurry of chaos shattered the night's eerie silence as that massive owl swooped down like a bolt of lightning, directly targeting Tyler. He barely had time to react before those vicious talons grabbed him, and a scream pierced the quiet night, echoing in my ears. My heart filled with terror and despair as I watched my friend get dragged down into the darkness, blood pouring from his wounds in a horrifying torrent. Run! I instinctively yelled at my friends, panic surging through me. We sprinted with every ounce of strength we could muster, the maniacal laughter of the cultists and the owl's eerie hoots echoing in our ears, mingling with Tyler's agonized groans. In the chaos, we desperately tried to drag the injured Tyler to safety, but the overwhelming fear and despair weighed us down like anchors. The trees seemed to twist and contort in the darkness, and every step we took felt like a warning, urging us to flee. Finally, we reached the edge of the forest, gasping for breath, our hearts racing with fear and adrenaline. The sounds of the nightmare faded into the distance, and only the faint light of the stars remained in the night sky, twinkling like distant memories. I glanced back at the shadowy woods, an overwhelming sense of dread and helplessness welling up inside me, threatening to consume me. Tyler! I grabbed his shoulder, trembling all over, my voice cracking with fear. Are you okay? He weakly shook his head, his hands covered in blood, his eyes reflecting pain and terror. Looking at him, I realized we could never go back to our old lives. Everything had changed in an instant. We need to find help, Rachel choked out, tears streaming down her face, blurring her vision. As dawn broke, we finally stumbled upon a small town, weary and shaken. The locals shrugged off our frantic story of what had happened in the woods, shaking their heads as if they didn't want to know the truth. But inside, we were far from calm. We could never forget that horrifying ritual and the haunting cries that echoed in our minds. The terror of that night changed us forever, leaving a permanent shadow in our hearts that would never fade. In the days that followed, Tyler's wounds healed, but the light in his eyes was gone, replaced by a haunting emptiness. We could never return to that valley for another adventure. The memories were too painful. Every time we talked about that trip, a wave of endless fear and loneliness washed over us, reminding us of the darkness we had witnessed. If you asked me if I'd ever go on a trip like that again, I'd tell you without hesitation, never again. Those secrets hidden in the darkness will always remain shadows I can never touch, haunting me with their mystery and terror. In this seemingly ordinary little town, a lot of regular folks go about their lives. I thought my life would stay the same until Bill walked into my world. We were neighbors, his house right next to mine. Bill was a middle-aged guy, shy and giving off a gentle vibe. But there was something unsettling in his eyes that piqued my curiosity. After a few casual chats, I learned he had just moved to town, but not long after settling in, strange things started happening in his home. At first, he only heard faint knocking and scratching sounds coming from the walls. Bill figured it might be some rodents causing the ruckus, so he set up traps to catch them. However, even after spending several nights patiently waiting in that dark attic, the noises didn't lessen. In fact, they grew louder. Every night, as darkness fell, the sounds, accompanied by unusual whispers, became unbearable, filling him with dread. "I really need your help," he said, his voice trembling. His plea unsettled me, but out of concern for my neighbor, I decided to stay up with him all night, trying to unravel this mystery. That night, we lit candles in Bill's house, the flickering light dancing in every corner, bringing a bit of warmth, but I knew we were both on edge. Time ticked by slowly, the air growing heavier, as if even the breeze had stopped in its tracks. We moved cautiously down the hallway, trying to trace the source of those sounds. Just as we approached the attic entrance, the noises suddenly stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. We exchanged nervous glances, tension sparkling in our eyes. I suggested we investigate further, and eventually, we found ourselves in front of a creaky door. Bill hesitated for a moment, but then nodded resolutely. As soon as we opened the door, a musty smell rushed out, the air thick with an eerie scent. We stepped carefully into the attic, which was covered in dust, devoid of any modern touches. Suddenly, a soft whimpering sound came from behind the walls, as if echoing the pain of the past. A shiver ran down my spine, making me question whether this was all just our imagination. But when I bent down to check the floor, I stumbled upon some broken toys and a few yellowed photographs. The pictures showed a smiling family, but I could sense that time had left deep wrinkles on those memories. I handed the photos to Bill, whose face gradually drained of color. As time passed, our curiosity was overshadowed by fear. At that moment, a heavy thud came from the corner of the room. We spun around in terror to see a door slowly creaking open, revealing a dark abyss. In the silence, it felt like some force was calling us. I felt a strong pull, as if an invisible hand was drawing me toward that darkness. Bill gripped my hand tightly. Though his teeth were clenched, I could feel his inner fear. We pushed open that door, and the deep darkness seemed endless, with faint whispers echoing around us. "What are you doing here?" a ghostly voice whispered in our ears, making us jump. The sound seemed to come from the depths of history, revealing the hidden past of this house. We had to face the terrifying truth. This place was steeped in countless tragedies. As we delved deeper, we felt history stirring, like countless souls softly mourning. The stories of Bill's house began to surface, and the lost spirits lingered in this space, carrying unresolved grudges. Gradually, Bill started recalling some rumors about the house. Strange stories circulated in town. Legend had it that this was the home of a tragic family, where a bizarre incident had occurred a few years back, and their child mysteriously vanished during a stormy night. Since then, many claim to have seen apparitions here and heard faint cries. As Bill's memories became clearer, the atmosphere around us grew increasingly sinister, as if something was lurking before us. We desperately wanted to escape, but it felt like there was no way out. The oppressive feeling made it hard to breathe, and we even began to doubt if we could leave this place safely. Then the door creaked again, as if inviting us deeper into the darkness. I tried to convince Bill to leave, but his gaze was fixed on those fading memories. A look of struggle crossed his face, as if he were battling his inner demons. Finally, under the pressure of whispering voices and the dampness seeping from the walls, we decided not to go any further. I pulled Bill back toward the attic exit with all my strength, silently praying for this to end. Like a nightmare, we finally stepped out of that door, but the soft calling still echoed behind us. Back at Bill's house, the night sky had quietly welcomed a full moon, casting a gentle glow through the windows. In that soft light, I saw the fear in his eyes gradually fade, but I knew this experience would forever mark him. Even though he would have to confront this terrifying truth, he ultimately chose to leave the house. A few days later, he packed his things, preparing to move elsewhere. When he said goodbye to me, his expression was complex, filled with both anticipation for a new life and deep reluctance for the past. I knew this house was not just a place for him, it was a haunting nightmare he couldn't shake off. As I stood at the door watching him leave, I realized this place still held secrets unknown to anyone. Perhaps the souls trapped within these walls were still calling out. I turned back to my own home, the night falling once more, the sounds returning, and I felt powerless, left with nothing but an endless gaze at that closed door. On a particularly dark and stormy night, I lay in bed, the wind howling outside my window as if it were whispering some unsettling premonition that sent chills down my spine. The moonlight streamed through the gaps in the curtains, casting a faint, eerie glow over my bed, illuminating the shadows that danced around the room. Just as I was about to drift off into a restless sleep, I heard a deep, gentle voice, as if it were coming from a faraway place, echoing through the stillness of the night. "Hey, come play." The voice sent a jolt through me, stirring memories long buried, and a familiar name flashed in my mind, Ricardo. My good friend, the one who left this world far too soon when he was just 5 years old. We used to play together in the warm sunlight, sharing countless happy moments filled with laughter and joy. But ever since he was gone, my life had become incredibly lonely and dark, a void that seemed impossible to fill. "Ricardo?" I called softly, my voice trembling, filled with confusion and hope, as I longed to believe that somehow he was still with me. "It's me." The voice came again, carrying a slight tremor that hinted at both familiarity and sorrow. "I'm here, with you." A wave of fear washed over me, yet I was also enveloped by a strange comfort, as if his presence was a warm embrace in the cold, dark night. Ricardo's voice reminded me of his sunny smile and the carefree days we chased each other in the park, our laughter echoing in the air. Even though I knew he was gone, in that moment, it felt like we were reunited in a way that transcended the boundaries of life and death. "Do you miss me?" he asked, his voice tinged with longing and a hint of sadness that tugged at my heartstrings. "I miss you so much," I replied, my sense of loneliness easing just a bit as memories of our joyful times together flooded my mind. As the night wore on, Ricardo's voice grew clearer and more distinct. He began to tell me about his experiences in another world, describing scenes I couldn't even begin to imagine. He said it was a colorful place, filled with vibrant hues and laughter, where there was no pain, just joy and freedom that he had always craved. I listened intently, captivated by his words, as if I could truly see the beautiful images he painted with his descriptions. However, as time passed, I noticed a hint of darkness creeping into Ricardo's words, like a shadow slowly enveloping the light. He started talking about the pain he endured while he was alive, recounting the experiences that made him feel angry and uneasy. His emotions seemed to deepen, becoming increasingly twisted, and I felt a growing sense of unease. "Do you know? I'm really lonely here," he said, his voice turning somber, as if he were sharing an indescribable sadness that weighed heavily on his heart. "I want revenge." "Revenge?" I was taken aback, a chill running down my spine at the intensity of his words. "Yes," he continued, his voice laced with a kind of mad desire that sent shivers through me. "Those who made me suffer, they should pay for it, don't you think?" I began to feel uneasy, realizing that this once warm and inviting voice had turned dark and foreboding. I wanted to escape from this conversation, but I couldn't resist the pull he had on me. Ricardo's presence made me feel lonely yet oddly dependent, as if I were drawn into a web of emotions I couldn't untangle. "Will you help me?" he asked, his voice full of expectation and something akin to desperation. I don't know," I stammered, fear filling my heart as I grappled with the implications of his request. "Don't you want to be with me?" His anger began to show in his voice, rising like a storm. "Don't you want me to be happy?" I felt a wave of suffocation, realizing I was being pulled into an inescapable whirlpool of his emotions. Ricardo's ghost had taken root in my heart, gradually occupying my thoughts and consuming my mind. I began to remember the times we had together, that boy who loved life and was full of dreams, now consumed by anger and pain that I could hardly comprehend. "We can do so many things together," his voice softened, as if tempting me with the idea of companionship. "As long as you're willing to help me." I took a deep breath, trying to clear my mind, but my thoughts were flooded with Ricardo's voice, echoing in my ears like a haunting melody. His presence warmed me, yet also filled me with fear, a conflicting sensation that made my heart race. I started to realize that Ricardo wasn't the boy I remembered. His soul had been twisted by hatred and a desire for vengeance that I couldn't understand. "What do you want?" I summoned my courage to ask, my heart heavy with unease and trepidation. "I want those who hurt me to pay the price," he replied coldly, his voice tinged with a hint of manic excitement that made my skin crawl. "I need your help to make them suffer as I did." My heart was filled with struggle. I wanted to help Ricardo, but I feared that his relentless pursuit of revenge would lead to deeper pain for both of us. I began to recall our happy times together, those carefree days filled with laughter and innocence. Did I really want him to pay for his own suffering, or was there another way? "We can find other ways," I tried to persuade him gently. "Revenge won't solve anything. It will only lead to more suffering for you." "You don't understand." His voice suddenly turned sharp and angry, cutting through the night like a knife. "They should all pay for it. They deserve to suffer." I felt a wave of fear wash over me, realizing I was being sucked into an inescapable whirlpool of his emotions. Ricardo's ghost had taken root in my heart, gradually occupying my thoughts. I started to remember the boy who loved life and was full of dreams, now consumed by anger and pain that I couldn't bear to witness. "I can't do this," I said firmly, a surge of courage rising within me, pushing back against the darkness that threatened to engulf me. "Don't you want to be with me?" His anger began to show in his voice again, rising like a tempest. "Don't you want me to be happy?" "Happiness isn't found through revenge." I struggled to stay calm, trying to reason with him amidst the turmoil. "We can find other ways to help you find peace and healing." "Peace?" He let out a cold laugh, his voice tinged with a hint of madness that sent chills down my spine. "You have no idea what I've been through. You can't possibly understand." I felt a wave of suffocation, realizing I was being pulled into an inescapable whirlpool of despair. Ricardo's voice echoed in my ears, urging me to make a choice, to take a side in this battle between light and darkness. I began to feel helpless, my heart filled with despair and uncertainty. "I need you," he said again softly, his voice tinged with a hint of pleading that tugged at my heartstrings. "You're my only friend, and I can't do this without you." I closed my eyes, trying to block out his words, but his voice wrapped around me like a shadow, refusing to let go. I knew I had to make a choice, but that choice felt incredibly difficult, as if I were standing on the edge of a precipice. "I'll help you, but not through revenge," I finally mustered the courage to say, my heart filled with determination and a flicker of hope. "You'll regret it." His voice held a hint of threat, a warning that sent shivers down my spine, but I wasn't going to back down from my decision. "I won't," I replied firmly, a spark of hope igniting within me, pushing back against the darkness that threatened to consume us both. As time went on, I began to realize that I couldn't solve Ricardo's pain for him. I could only be there for him, listen to his heart, and help him find inner peace amid the chaos of his emotions. Though his anger still lingered like a storm cloud overhead, I hoped to use my warmth and compassion to dispel the shadows in his heart, to bring light into his darkness. "You have to trust me," I said softly, trying to convey my sincerity and commitment to helping him. "I'll give it a try," he finally replied, his voice carrying a hint of hesitation, as if he were weighing the possibility of hope against the weight of his despair. In the days that followed, Ricardo and I communicated more and more, sharing our thoughts and feelings in a way that felt both freeing and terrifying. He began sharing more stories from his life, recounting the moments that brought him joy and pain, revealing the complexities of his emotions. Though his voice still carried a hint of darkness, I could feel the vulnerability and longing deep within him, a desire to be understood and accepted. "I really miss those days," he would sometimes sigh, his voice tinged with nostalgia that echoed in my heart. "Those were the best times of my life." "So do I replied, my heart warming at the memories we shared, the laughter and the joy that seemed so distant now. As our communication deepened, I began to understand Ricardo's pain and anger on a profound level. Deep down, he still longed for love and understanding, not the thrill of revenge that he had convinced himself would bring him peace. I hoped to guide him out of that darkness, helping him find the inner peace he so desperately sought. "We can create new memories together," I suggested, hoping to give him some hope and a sense of purpose beyond his current desires. "New memories?" He seemed curious about the idea, intrigued by the possibility of something different. "Yes," I replied, my heart filled with anticipation and excitement. "We can imagine those beautiful scenes together and relive the joy we once had." Gradually, Ricardo's voice became softer, as if responding to my suggestion with a glimmer of hope. He began to describe beautiful images, sunlight pouring over the land, flowers blooming in vibrant colors, and birds singing joyfully in the sky. We played together in our imaginations, as if we had truly returned to that carefree childhood, where laughter and joy were our only concerns. "This feels so good," he said softly, his voice carrying a hint of long-lost happiness that warmed my heart. "Yes, we can keep doing this," I replied, my heart filled with hope, believing that together we could find a way to heal. Yet, I knew this wasn't the end of our journey. Ricardo still had unresolved pain that needed to be addressed, and I had to confront my own fears that had haunted me for so long. I began to understand that only by truly facing the shadows within could I find a way to break free from the chains of despair that bound us both. "I'll always be here for you," I said firmly, courage igniting within me, a promise I intended to keep no matter the cost. "Thank you," his voice carried a hint of gratitude, as if responding to my promise, a bond forming between us that transcended the boundaries of life and death. As time passed, Ricardo and I grew closer, our connection deepening with each shared experience. His voice was no longer a dark whisper, but filled with warmth and hope, a testament to the power of friendship and understanding. We shared our joys and sorrows, becoming each other's support in a world that felt so isolating. In this process, I also learned to face my own fears, confronting the shadows that had haunted me for so long. Those memories that once troubled me no longer seemed so scary. They became part of my story, a testament to my growth. I began to understand that fear wasn't the enemy, but a part of my journey, a necessary step toward healing and self-discovery. "We're becoming stronger together," I said softly, my heart filled with conviction and belief in our shared path. "Yes," Ricardo replied, his voice steady, reflecting the strength we had found in each other. In the end, Ricardo and I stepped out of that darkness together, hand in hand, united in our journey. His soul found peace as he let go of the anger that had consumed him for so long, and I learned how to confront my inner fears, emerging stronger on the other side. Even though he was no longer in this world, our friendship would forever live on in my heart, a beautiful reminder of the power of love and understanding. As night fell again, I lay in bed, the wind gently blowing outside, bringing a touch of warmth that wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. Though Ricardo's voice no longer echoed in the stillness of the night, I knew his presence would always be with me, a cherished memory that would forever reside in my heart, guiding me through the darkness and into the light.